Before that time.
The physics behind, for example,
another question people
the
think
actual change in
under
mass.
the ultimate question is to evaluate
Over the course of the 7 years,
ethics
the book was put together.
Welcome to the Scholars Chair. Is education a moral imperative? If so, why do 30% of all students drop out before graduation, and what can our community do to improve the situation? Tonight, a conversation with author and co-founder of the Islamic Society of Southern Prince George's County, Dawud Abdur-Rahman. At Focus, the moral imperative of education from an Islamic point of view.
Let the conditions of inequality that we suffered under, when we are the oppressor, the dominant class, let's not impose that injustice on the others.
Anybody think that you could have a just system without giving women their rights?
Everyone has an opinion, and we sit around the marketplace and talk about opinion, but what is truth?
With the shareholder, their goal is similar to the business, to maximize profit.
That belief becomes a context for a development of knowledge.
Say physics is the DNA of technology because the rules for how you build new technology starts in physics.
Because Quran challenges the people. It's not only the people of the book, it challenges Muslims.
We say secular, they hear godless.
Right.
What was intended?
Watch the Scholars Chair every Monday night. And here is your host.
So Dawud, thank you so much for being here today. I really loved your essay, and I want to know why. Let's start off with just by asking, why do you think that education is a moral imperative under the tenets of Islam? Can you explain that?
Sure, and thank you for having me on the program. I appreciate being invited back again. Education is a moral imperative under the tenets of al-Islam, primarily because Allah, which is the proper name for the one and only God in al-Islam, the being that naturally exists by himself, created human beings with a nature that's suited for inquiry, that you want to know, that you incline towards right guidance. And a big part of the teachings of the Quran, an example of the Prophet Muhammad, is that through faith and reason that we would conclude that there is one creator, sustainer, evolver of the universe, and that because of our role as human beings, we will want to, in our worship of that one entity, we will want to learn about creation, be the custodian of that creation, and to live in harmony with all the natural and human environment. That is a condition of al-Islam, which is peace, safety, and harmony. And that's the overarching mission, I think, of a Muslim. And that's, in our belief system, pre-wired into our soul and our consciousness to understand that, look at the creation, understand the signs of Allah and the creation in ourselves, and then try to learn how that we can better manage the creation that we've been given charge of.
So what I really loved about the paper is you talked about these tenets and why education is an imperative under the tenets of al-Islam, as you say, and the history of how first the quest for knowledge was taken away from blacks that were brought to America and enslaved. And I wanted to just get you to talk a little bit about that, the importance of reclaiming education because it was illegal for blacks to learn. Sure. You really hit home on that during slavery. So how can we get back to a place where we're seeking that knowledge in the black community?
Sure. Well, part of the reason when I write a lot of my papers and in my book that I've written, The Dhikr of Authenticity, a part of my style is to really reconnect the total black experience with the tenets and principles of al-Islam. And so when I wrote this paper, I really just wanted to revisit and remind people because history is very important. El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X said that of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. And to remember that part of the enslavement of people, of Africans enslaved in America, part of that methodology and system of enslavement required ignorance. As W.B. Du Bois said, it was a compulsory ignorance. I just want to refresh and rekindle that understanding that part of our struggle, part of the struggle for equality, for rights in America, necessarily included the right to be educated, to learn, to get a quality education. And so I like to connect those dots, both theologically and historically, in a way to say that in a situation now where, and this is not true of every black community, that every black community doesn't have a quality school system, or that all black students are not achieving or learning, but in those areas where we do find that situation, and because I do believe that there was never really a comprehensive solution to the situation that we found ourselves in through slavery, through Jim Crow and the Civil Rights Movement, that I think we have an additional obligation to try to reach back, to try to help with comprehensive solutions, and to try to figure out what we can do as we still try to help our families, but to try to reach back and extend to our neighbors and relatives and friends and others to try to level the playing field to help provide and agitate and advocate for quality education in our community, but for all communities. Because as you mentioned, in America now, the education system is not just an issue in the black community, it's in the entire education system as we find ourselves in the world community. But I do believe that we have a specific obligation, because of our experience and because of our history, to be very concerned about anybody who seems to be left behind, literally, in this case.
And I think when you say reach back, to our history as Black Americans and that history of slavery, I think it's important, your points about avoiding being, not only fighting against being uneducated, but also being miseducated. And I think that is a point that we could really look at today. And for example, to draw parallels in my own life, I would think back to when I was in middle school and high school, and even today, my mom's a teacher in Prince George's County. A lot of children are told by other children, and sometimes even by adults that don't value education, that if you pursue education, you're acting white. That is an expression of you trying to be white. Would you call this an example of miseducation? And if so, how can we fight this type of miseducation in the Black community?
Yeah, definitely an indication of miseducation. I mean, just an example of miseducation, and it's unfortunate that, and this is not something that's true of all communities. I mean, when I grew up, I was raised by a single mother. But I was raised by a single mother who was an avid reader. I mean, she read a lot, so she passed that on to me. And so because I read, following her example, I tended to speak proper English, or, as people would say. And I wasn't teased about talking white, but I was told at different times to talk normal. I mean, that was the term in my neighborhood, which means talk like everybody else. And so I think that one of the ways to really break that cycle, which is unfortunate, because that's not our history, that's not our culture, that's not certainly what we strove for at any time in our sojourn here in America, is through continuing to put out role models that value education, to reward educational achievement as much as we reward athletic and other types of things. And I mean really at the same time, at sports events, at musical events, so that there's a balance. I don't think that there's a way that you can shield your children from different influences, but I think you can try as best you can as parents and as a community to equip your children with the ability to make choices that will lead them to a place that'll be a better place than a place that's kind of a negative place. So I think a lot of it is education, providing choices, being comprehensive, and rewarding and imaging and showing role models for people who've achieved academically, and show that that's not tied to one culture, and it's certainly not being white or some other culture if you're achieving academically.
I think that one of the things that really struck me with what you said was being your mother supported you in your efforts to read and to educate yourself, and you followed her example. Well, and what happens if you have a parent who is, caught in a cycle of poverty? He's not necessarily, or he or she is not necessarily a bad parent, is a loving parent, but doesn't necessarily prize education as a way to uplift yourself economically down the road. Right. How can community leaders teach the parent in a way that doesn't sound like you're speaking down to that parent? How can we address the issue of if the parent doesn't prize education, how can we get the parent to, one, begin to prize education and then encourage the child to seek out those role models?
Right. That's a good question, and it's and I think it's a fair question because the being in a position of poverty doesn't make you a bad parent necessarily. Right. And it really is. It depends on what everybody's exposed to. I have read about various programs where they're actually piloting teaching parents how to be parents, not the same way they teach some teenage mothers and others how to be mothers and how to properly feed their children. Mm-hmm. They're also piloting programs to teach people how to advocate for education and to value education, so as a way to help their children's lives be better. The difficulty with that, and I think you kind of hit on it, is how do you do that in a way that you're not being condescending, that you're not presuming that, that just because someone is in a certain situation that they're not engaging in that behavior. And once again, I think that in everything that I've looked at, I don't think there's any one answer to solving the issue of education, but it does seem to be a combination of things in the schools, in the home, in the recreational facility, in a religious area. Everybody needs to be in a coordinated, in a very coordinated fashion, giving the same message and reinforcing the same behaviors in every area that our children happen to find themselves in. And in areas that are less privileged, I think then there's a greater need for more funded programs and more public assistance and even more support from the private sector with various programs. So I think that a lot of it just has to do with making sure that as much as you can, coordinate all the various institutions, the family, religious, the schools, the recreational activities, in a way that that the same message is being reinforced, so that people are growing in an environment where they understand that education, seeking knowledge, certain careers are not, and certain businesses are not unavailable if you're really striving to go there and do that consistently.
That's interesting that you speak about the environment, and everything has to work together to create this positive, reinforcing environment so that you can break the cycle of poverty. But in your essay, you talk about Michelle Alexander's work, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, and you refer to her metaphor of Black youths as birds in a cage.
Caught in a bird cage.
Caught in a bird cage.
Right.
And when they're caught in the bird cage, the rungs of the bird cage are the things that are keeping them entrapped in the cycle of poverty. And it's not necessarily that those rungs were meant to entrap the bird, but they're just part of the environment, and thus they are still part of the entrapment. And I think that media, especially videos that talk about, that hip hop, a lot of hip hop videos and hard rap videos that demonstrate gratuitous sex or play a lifestyle where you get fast money. We have these media images that are the rungs in the cage that are keeping Black youths entrapped to a certain degree. So how do we get those positive role models? The fact is that our environment, and today's teenagers' environment, consists of a lot of media, whether it's tweeting or music videos, or whether it's online. So how do we get some of those positive media images out there to take down some of those rungs and open up a little space so you can fly out?
So I would say the answer to that question is, and when I read Michelle Alexander's metaphor of the bird cage, saying that there are various systems that aren't necessarily designed independently to channel people from the school to the prison pipeline, but they effectively have that effect, whether it's unjust sentencing for certain first offenses, or the fact that certain programs are not funded in certain communities for education, which kind of leads to people making other choices. I think that the answer is, and thinking as this is a Muslim, is that Muslims try to think of things because the Quran is described in the Quran by as a comprehensive message, that the Prophet Muhammad was a comprehensive messenger to all people. So the answer to these sort of pervasive problems is to not delude yourself into thinking that you can go into a school system or go into a home, and just because you fund Head Start, that's going to solve everything, or because you go and give a nice speech, or you're a mentor in a school, that's somehow going to fix things, or that you go to one parent-teacher meeting, that's going to solve the problem, or you put all the pressure on the parents. But there really has to be an orchestrated, comprehensive approach that when you're looking at a community, you almost have to descend on that community and say that we're going to implement multiple things all at once to try to create an environment. And as a Muslim, when we think of an environment where there's safety and security and it's an area, and you feel secure and you can prosper, that in some ways philosophically that's Islam. And so we try, as a Muslim, you try to create that sense wherever you are, because as a Muslim, one of your imperatives is to try to help the community wherever you find yourself, whether they're Muslims or not. So I think that as a parent myself and looking at other parents, there's going to be negative images in certain videos. There are going to be certain negative influences. But I think that when you're a parent, you try to equip your children with the ability to make good choices. And when you look at communities where, for whatever reason, to use the term that Eugene Robinson used in his book, The Splintering of Black America.
Disintegration.
The disintegration, the Splintering of Black America, is that you have to come in to those communities and really think through in a comprehensive manner how you're going to really attack and try to shore up every aspect of that social environment to give those people, the parents, the children, the educators, everybody an opportunity to succeed, recognizing that there's no silver bullet. And even if you do all that, there are some people who won't necessarily succeed, but at least you give them an opportunity to, and you don't think that just by pulling one rung of the cage that somehow that's going to fix the problem. You have to really think of things comprehensively.
I would agree with that. And I want to touch on your reference to disintegration, Eugene Robinson's work there, and his reference to the abandoned, that community of a permanent Black underclass. So I want to ask you, how do you think that permanent underclass is created by some loss of a sense of hope? Even if so there are all these resources now. There are Head Start, and there are communities that are really engaged, but still there is a prevalence of shootings and, the school to prison pipeline that Michelle Alexander talks about. So there are efforts to make a difference, but still there seems to be a sense of hopelessness amongst Black youth.
Some youth.
Some of them are very positive.
Right.
But in a lot of communities, and you make the difference between urban communities, Black communities, and poor communities, and saying that they're not always synonymous.
That's right.
So you do make that point.
Right.
But when we're addressing, if we can bring up let's say 50% that are struggling with those issues, then all of us will be uplifted.
That's
right.
Right?
Okay, so how do we address that hopelessness? And why is it there?
It's there because some people do get into cycles. I mean, those cycles do happen. And Michelle Alexander talks about this, Eugene Robinson talks about this, and other sociologists talk about this, where for some reason, and I'm sure there's some science behind it, certain communities get into a spiral. Some families get into a spiral where they've just gotten into a trend, and the only way that I've seen that really seems to work in certain areas in those situations is when you go in and you almost have an intervention that is really comprehensive. And one thing I did notice when I look at different programs where schools have made a change and they've provided a vision, they provide encouragement, they provided nurturing. In a lot of ways, the schools have taken the place of the parents. They've actually stepped in. They've stepped in between the cycle that has happened in that family and create an intervention and taking the place of the parents, so that somehow in those situations where it's happened, those students can see a way forward that isn't the same as what they've come from. And so when some of the studies I've read, and I look at Dr. Ivory Todson quite a bit, who's appearing this program. He's at Howard University, getting away from some of the stereotypes about if there's a single mother, then that means that someone won't be successful, or just because there's poverty, someone can't achieve.
Right.
He really looks at those things comprehensively to get away from those sound bites to say, let's look at the real statistics and let's look at the totality of this picture and try to recreate comprehensive models in very targeted ways, so that we can enhance the ability of certain communities to be successful. It really is about breaking cycles, but it's about breaking cycles in a way that is comprehensive, and that is a way that gives the children and even educating the parents in some of those things a way to see another alternative that they may not have experienced. In spite of the fact that there's opportunities here, there are some people who still haven't been able to benefit from them, or haven't seen them for whatever reason. They haven't been able to.
That's interesting that you're talking about, the comprehensive approach and a targeted approach to achieving, this reclaiming education as a moral imperative for the community. And I think that really harkens back to, in your paper, when you refer to the Reconstruction era, when all of a sudden it was necessary to educate 5 million formerly enslaved Black people at one time.
Right.
It had to be a targeted approach.
That's right.
It had to, you had to get over stereotypes of what a slave was and create something new.
Right.
And while Eugene Robinson refers to the abandoned and a present period of hopelessness, there was a period of hope then. Do you think that there has ever been another time when there was that mass sense of hope amongst the Black community that we could build off of to encourage education as a value?
Yeah, I don't think, I'll answer the question this way by saying that I don't think that education as a value has disappeared from the Black community. I really don't. I don't think that the Black community has accepted throughout the culture as a value to be miseducated or to not strive educationally. I think that some of the problems that we see in the Black community are reflective of the symptoms that we see in the American educational system, in some ways. And I think the point that I make is that the reason I talk about history, because I really like history, I talked about Malcolm X in history, is to say that there's a straight line. There's a straight line in our being placed here in America and our ultimate fulfillment of a destiny as a people here that includes striving to constantly improve yourself, to be sure of yourself, to worship God, to worship Allah in a kind manner, in a thoughtful manner, to care about other people, and to try to always try to grow and strive and improve, coming from the depths that we came from, and not losing sight of that. I think I've read at different places where people that forget its past will make the same mistakes, or they won't understand their future. And I don't talk about things in the past to harp on them or to be angry about them necessarily, but to provide motivation and inspiration to say, if this kind of progress or these kind of things could happen under these conditions, then there's absolutely no excuse why we can't do even better now. Matter of fact, there's little or no excuse why and there's every reason why we should. I don't think there's anybody who would argue that great progress has been made, but certainly I do feel that there's an obligation to our struggle and what we've been through to certainly not go backwards, and to try to extend ourselves within ourselves and to the larger society.
So looking forward to today, you have your historical references, but they, as you said, that they're leading to a path to today to show that what we can achieve, what is possible. And so you're taking the hopeful approach.
That's
I
right.
like that, the hopeful approach.
Right.
And I'm there with you. So, I think in your paper you reference a meeting that took place in December of 2012 of 60 African American leaders, Al Sharpton from National Action Network, Benjamin Jealous from the NAACP. I think that, and you talked about how they laid out an action plan that we can take steps to achieve now, so that we can move the agenda forward, so that we can uplift the Black community. And I was wondering if you could tell me, and all of those people that are tuning in are eagerly waiting to hear you discuss what was this action plan, what are the things that are outlined in it?
Well, part of the plan is a lot of the things that have been the object of the striving of Black people from the time we've been here. I mean, they were economic parity for African Americans, promoting equity and educational opportunity, protecting our voting rights status, eliminating health care disparities, and achieving comprehensive reform in the criminal justice system. When you look at our history, all and any combination of those things have been used as tools to stunt and limit the growth of Black people here in America. And so in certain degrees, we're still striving to try to get there. And I think in some ways that meeting was politically motivated because at the same time that America had achieved the historic accomplishment of electing its first Black president, certainly the Black community didn't feel as though it had benefited from that presidency as much as some of the leaders felt like the Black community should have, and they wanted to reaffirm, I guess, some of the core principles that they would hope to happen in the next term if Barack Obama was elected. But my takeaway from it was that those issues are all things that, yes, there needs to be support from the federal and local level on those things, but they really do start in the home with parents who value education, and one area that I think that in the Black community that we could benefit from is understanding money better, how to invest, how to save, how certain choices, understand the difference between income and wealth, and putting money away to pass something down to the next generation to the degree that we can. I think all those things work together to help solidify our ability to prosper and to have healthy families and to have vibrant communities. So it's not just putting out a petition at the federal level, but it's also really understanding those principles at the local level and in the family, and working on various projects and working together and educating ourselves so that we can do something for ourselves along those same principles. As we move forward individually and collectively, and even as a country.
So out of those, in 1 minute or less, because we have to wrap up, and I could talk about this with you forever, but I just want to know, out of those actions outlined in the plan, the comprehensive plan, which do you think that the African American community should pursue first?
Economic parity. And I would say that because when you read the history of the civil rights movement, the area that is most consistently lamented as sort of lagging behind the political rights was the economic program that accompanied that. And even when you look at education as a moral imperative, there's a recognition that poverty and education don't really mix. It's hard to be good in school when you're hungry, sitting there in the classroom. So I would focus on that first.
All right, economic parity. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I think that we have well discussed how education is a moral imperative from an Islamic perspective. And if you'd like to view more of the Scholars Chair programs, go online to Read One channel on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook on Read One Communication /Khalil Shadid. Additionally, you can email us at thescholarchair@gmail.com. I'm Maya Harris Cameron. Thank you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.